Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this video today, I'm going to discuss Descartes' Cogito, and we're going to figure out what the Cogito is, what Descartes intended in discussing the Cogito, where Descartes, was situated within the philosophy of ideas, sort of what his stance was, how he defended his arguments, and ultimately his justification for the Cogito, right? So with that, let's begin. So this is okay. So this is Descartes' Cogito. The first thing to discuss is we need to situate Descartes within the history of philosophy, right? Within the history of philosophical ideas. First thing that we need to recognize is that Descartes was what's known as a rationalist, right? Descartes was a rationalist. And basically, hold on, let me check my phone here. Basically, rationalism is an epistemological view that says that we can understand the totality of existence based on reason, right? So we can use reason to access the truths of reality, right? So the rationalist says that through reason and reason alone, we can use this tool to access the truths of reality. So we can use reason to access the truths of reality, right? So it's a very basic sort of introductory definition of rationalism. So he's actually not only a rationalist, he was, technically speaking, one of the first rationalists, right? Usually you have the distinction between rationalism and empiricism, right? You have a group on the one hand that says you can use reason to access the truths of reality, and we label them as rationalists. R-A-T-I-O-N-A-L-I-S. So we have rationalists, we have the truth, and then opposed to rationalism is what's known as empiricism. And the difference is rationalists believe that they have the tools in order to access the truth. Empiricists believe that they have the tools to access the truth, but there's no sort of overlap between rationalism. Generally speaking, there's no overlap between rationalism and empiricism. So according to Descartes, Descartes believes, and in discussing his Cogito, and I'll describe what this is in a little bit, we'll see how Descartes uses sort of the rationalist tenets to access the truth, right? And that ultimately is the question, right? When Descartes describes the Cogito, and when we get to explaining when I get to explaining exactly what that is, the question then becomes, what is the truth, right? How can I know that something is true? And Descartes creates this very, very amazing argument, and it's actually a reductive argument, and I'll get into that in a second as well, to try and access the truth, right? So what he's doing is he's creating an argument to reduce perception from reality, right? So that in the end he arrives at the truth, and we'll see what that truth is and how that affects the nature of his philosophy. Okay. So with that then, we recognize that Descartes is attempting to arrive at the truth, but it's not just a relative truth, right? It's not a truth that might just be subjective or relative to him. What he's looking for is absolute certainty. So the goal is right? He's looking for attaining absolute certainty. And the process in which Descartes is going to use to arrive at absolute certainty is a specific, a very unique philosophical tool, right? The name of the sort of methodology that he's going to use is what's known as radical doubt, or technically methodological skepticism. Alright, So Descartes' going to use methodological skepticism to arrive at absolute certainty. So in the picture that I drew before, where we have rationalism, and now I'll just label it with an R, and we're trying to access the truth. The manner in which Descartes accesses the truth is this, right? Methodological skepticism is the tool that he uses rationally to access the truths of reality. These truths aren't subjective truths. These truths aren't relative truths. These truths are truths which he can be absolutely certain of, right? That irrespective of whatever deceit, irrespective of whatever perceptual variations or differences, Descartes wants to be able to arrive at this truth with absolute certainty, and the process he uses to do it is radical doubt or methodological skepticism. All right. So the question then obviously becomes, how does Descartes arrive at this process of truth? Well, the idea of radical doubt, right? This idea of methodically being skeptical, methodically critiquing the things that we observe in our daily lives, isn't necessarily unique just to Descartes, right? What Descartes was able to do, though, that was sort of distinguished him from other philosophers, especially those that came before him, is that Descartes was able to internalize this process of methodological skepticism, of radical doubt, and use his mind to arrive at what he perceived, and he ultimately argued was the ultimate truth. The beginning, the sort of first phase of this process of radical doubt begins with questioning the senses, right? So what he wants to do is he wants to question, right? He wants to question the senses. He wants to question perception. So you'll have the perceiver, and this is the perceiver, and you'll have that which is perceived, right? So you have the perceiver, you have that which is perceived, and what he wants to be able to do, Descartes wants to be able to do, is to try and access the truths of reality by questioning the things that he sees. And the first thing that he'll think of, and the first thing that comes to mind is that I recognize that I can have hallucinations, right? I recognize that I can hallucinate. I recognize that I can be riding on, let's say, a long, hot road somewhere, let's say in Arizona, and I might see this haze rising from the floor, right? I recognize that there are people who may have color blindness, right? And they don't see the world as I see the world. So I immediately begin to question the things that I'm seeing, right? The things that I'm capable of perceiving. The first thing that I can doubt is my perception, right? Can my perception, can the things in the world that I see deceive me? Could it be the case that they look other than they appear to look? Well, obviously, yes, it can be the case that it looks other than it actually might be, right? So that perception is one of the first things that Descartes questions. With respect to his particular brand of perception, and this is more along the lines of his epistemology, and I've said this in other videos, and epistemology is a theory of knowledge. With respect to Descartes' particular brand of epistemology, he has the following depiction, right? Let's imagine that this is a tree, right? So you imagine that there's a tree out in the world, right? And the perceiver perceives this tree. Well, what ends up happening is that in the perceiver's mind, right? In the perceiver's mind, the perceiver has this image then of a tree. So I see a tree, and then because I've seen this tree, I now have this perception, this idea, this concept of this tree in my mind. There's a technical term for this sort of epistemological interpretation of the world, and it's what's known as naive realism, right? Naive realism.